Now in this video, we are going to elaborate more on the silhouette process. Now, taking information from the first two videos, we are going to start adding all of that here. Now, I want you to start thinking about who our characters are. So far, we have 3 of them. I've already designed the Snow White character in a previous video, so in this one, we are going to focus on designing for the Queen, the Huntsman, and one of her dwarves. Let's start with the silhouette and character design for our dwarf. Now I've put a small image of our Snow White that I had done in a previous video on the top left. So this is so that while I am designing my dwarf, I keep in mind the style that I'm going for. Now, if you think about the story of Snow White, the dwarves were very friendly characters. They basically came to the aid of Snow White when she needed their help. So keeping this in mind, I'm going to create a very round shape for my dwarf. I'm going to emphasize that as much as I can. I'm going to give him a very round body, very roundish arms. And now and then I'm going to balance that out with some straight shapes. I don't have to make him very round, otherwise it can be a little too mushy. But that's, again, as you develop as a character designer, you can make these decisions on your own without being too hesitant about it. But I'm going to keep it very simple in this case. We're going to just start out with a shape at first. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking to myself, like, where everything is going to be. Again, keeping in mind all my character design fundamentals, the form, the perspective, the anatomy, and we're not going to think about composition for now. That would come toward the end. So for now, I have like this nice big black kind of shape, darkish gray shape. You can choose to work in black, you can choose to work in light gray, but just make sure that your form is solid. That is very important. And don't worry so much about detail. Right now, as I am drawing out my character, that is what I'm thinking would be his entire head and his torso. And that little shape I've drawn coming out on the right, I think I want it to be his arm. And now I'm just kind of drawing indicators for where I think his legs would be. And remember to keep it very rough. Detail is just going to be a distraction in this stage. For now, all we want to do is communicate a certain emotion, and that is that our dwarf is a friendly, nice guy. Just by looking at the shape, that's all we want to evoke. So as I'm drawing, I'm thinking about that the whole time. Can I do something that is going to make him seem less evil? Can I do something that's going to make him show what he does? I mean, our dwarf is, I think, a miner, right? So I'm going to give him like a little anvil, but I'm not going to make it very sharp. I've rounded out that edge. He's holding something in his hand right now, and I don't want it to look too heavy-handed. I don't want it to look too sharp. I'm going to leave that information for my queen. I'm going to leave the strong, very, straight lines for my huntsman. For this guy, we're going to keep it round and curvy. And, of course, as I'm elaborating on this, I will adjust and edit. There's going to be a point where I'm going to look at all my characters together in one line, and they might look like they don't belong in the same universe, which is going to be very weird. Maybe my dwarf will look far too rounded next to my very straight huntsman. So I want to be able to add some edits to that shape so it still feels like it's from the same universe. It doesn't have to be completely rounded, but just enough so that it makes sense. And I think that balance is very important to find. And it might not work the first time, but that's where you keep going at it as much as you can. Now I'm at that stage where I think I want to start adding in a few details to my silhouette. I have lowered the opacity so that the gray isn't so dark that I can see what I am drawing. So at this step, what you really want to do is start understanding your silhouette, start understanding your shape language. What is this that I have created? How can I make sense of what this shape is? I like the way it looks now. I think it's evoking the emotion I want. Now what do I do? What's the next step? And this is where your perspective and your anatomy start to come in. Now be sure to work on separate layers. I have a separate layer for where my silhouette is and a separate layer for where I'm drawing the lines. And this is because as I'm drawing the lines, I'm almost like cleaning up, right? I'm trying to understand my character a little better, but my silhouette is going to change. So I'm going to constantly be hiding this layer and making sure that my silhouette keeps making sense, because I'm going to start erasing out certain parts. And if it doesn't work, if it works, because if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't help our character in any way. I've added some perspective lines going through the middle of my character. This is to just indicate the central part of his body, where exactly I would place the nose. So right now I'm kind of drawing out the shape of where I think his nose would be. And of course our dwarves cannot be complete with a nice thick mustache and beard. So, I'm going to start drawing that out right now. And I'm keeping my shapes, again, very rounded, very curvy. During this process, you really have to think about what you're doing. Don't just do it if it doesn't make sense. And I keep emphasizing this, I know, but I think that's a very important part of your character design. Right now, what I want to be able to do is create shapes that make sense within my shape. I know that sounds very existential, but seriously, like right now we have a very big round shape, but we also have several little shapes within that, right? And those all have to make sense as well. Now, as you can see, I have given an indication of where the arm is. I've given him a nice big beard and a big nose. And, I've drawn where his arm is standing out and it's holding onto this big anvil. I think it makes really nice sense. The information is working. I tried giving him very big slanted eyes. I thought that made him look a little too evil, that shape, right? That shape didn't really work for him. So I'm trying different things. I'm going to try giving him some big pupils now. I like the idea of giving him very rounded, kind of helpless looking eyes, almost very kind eyes actually. So I'm going to do that and emphasize that shape. But I also want to keep in mind the style that I'm going for. So I know it's a lot to think of, but you will develop this as you keep doing your character designs. You will be able to think simultaneously about shape language as well as style. It'll come naturally to you the more you do it. Now, I like my dwarf to maybe be slightly older than Snow White, and so I want to give him these bags under his eyes, which I've drawn. And now that I've kind of created these very loose shapes, you can go in there and start erasing stuff so that it doesn't look as messy. He kind of looks a bit like Humpty Dumpty to me right now. He's a little too egg-shaped. So I'm going to break up that silhouette a bit. I'm going to add a ear to him, a nice big ear, and this is going to change my base shape. So let's see if it works. Actually, I'm going to take the lasso tool first, and I think I want to decrease his beard a little bit. It's quite big right now, and it's really, that shape is overpowering my character. It's covering too much of him right now, and just by adjusting that, I think it looks a lot better. And now I can add more information to my character. Right now, his very big round beard was taking up so much. I think this was able to really get rid of that. So, I'm creating little notes for where his boots will be, and now let's go ahead and add in some ears and see if that makes sense. I think I'm going to adjust his beard a little. Right now it's too rounded. I want to give it a slight more U-shaped feel to it. Idea of creating very straight lines going down his beard, just to emphasize the direction in which his beard is going in. But I also think these straight lines balance out my character a little more. Right now he was so round and curvy and doughy. I wanted to kind of maybe erase that a little bit. So I'm happy with the amount of information I've added to my dwarf. Be sure to hide these layers and see what it looks like. This is what my drawing is without the silhouette. And now let's add it. I'm going to lower the opacity and just erase out that silhouette. Now I'm just going to go ahead and adjust the nose again. I think it's a little too thin and too long. I'm going to try some different shapes to see which one I like best. Again, making sure to keep it rounded and friendly throughout. Like, don't take it away from that. Remember that our dwarf is a friendly character and that information should be shown throughout. Sometimes when I'm working so close to my character, it's easy to not see the bigger picture. So zoom out as much as you can and really look at your character at a distance and make sure that the information is working, that these big shapes that you have make sense from far off. I don't want to add any detail that I cannot see from far off, right? And or detail that's unnecessary. You can always add your little knickknacks here and there. But right now, when it comes to the design and communication that I'm trying to evoke, that should make sense from far off. Now, I think that his shape still is a little too egg-shaped for my liking, so I want to break that a little bit. I'm going to add in a little tuft of hair kind of coming out from the top. And you know, if I look at my silhouette, this might look a lot like maybe devil ears or very mean-looking cat ears, so it might not work. But I'm going to keep it there because I'm going to put all my characters together in a line later on and adjust it then. For now, I think that this works and I'm quite happy with it. So why don't we move on to our huntsman and take it from there. Now I've made a small thumbnail and moved it to the top above our Snow White. This is so that I keep paying attention to my dwarf and making sure that when I start designing my next character, that the shape language is going to be much different. And we're going to be working on the huntsman now. So that basically means we are going to think of strong shapes, symmetrical. And of course, it doesn't have to be perfect symmetry, but it does have to have that very box-like shape to it. And now, just as I did with my square cat in the previous video, let's draw a big box right now. And I'm going to start adding in a few details. And look at how big my brush is at this moment. I've got it very thick and I'm working in very loose shapes. Now I've created two little lines for where I think his legs could be, and I want to add in his head. I'm going to create a very small little square-like shape on the top. If you ever see superheroes on TV or in film, notice how they tend to have very big squarish torsos and then a very small head on the top. This is a very nice way to really balance out your character so that it's not too overbearing all around. Now I'm quite happy with the box-like shape of my character. I then want to jump in there and just start adding in the detail. Remember to work on a new layer at all times because, during this process again, I will be hiding to make sure that I'm not losing any information in my silhouette. I want to maintain that box-like shape. And now again, just like I did before, I'm just kind of indicating where things are. Those are his shoulders. I want to give him a nice big full beard. I think that his neck is a little too short, so I'm going to move it up and give him a nice long boxy neck. And this also helps, separate my silhouette a little bit so that his head is not directly into his body. It would look kind of silly. I want him to still look and feel very heroic. Notice how I'm drawing very straight lines. I'm not thinking too much about round shapes, just long, straight, confident lines. And now I'm just going to give him some small little feet here to just balance out that big boxiness of his entire shape. Now I want to just create an indication for where his axe, his weapon, would be. Now I'm going to lower the opacity and fill in the missing information on my silhouette. I want to make sure that these shapes worked. I've changed my silhouette a little bit, so we want to make sure that the information is still there. And I'm just going to put my dwarf next to him to just show you the difference in the shape language, how my dwarf is so much more rounded next to my very big, boxy huntsman. Now on a new layer, I'm going to start adding in more information. I lowered the opacity of the previous layer. This was like my guidelines to help me decide where everything is. It doesn't necessarily make sense. So now I want to just go ahead and start adding in some more detail, like his ears and where his hair is going to be and where his eyes are going to be. I also think I want to make his shoulders just slightly more droopier. Again, this is going to change my silhouette. It might not work, but I think stylistically, I think it looks a little bit better, and I don't think it takes away from his big box-like shape, so I'm going to keep it there. I'm adding in information to his belt now, again, really emphasizing that square shape. Now I want to just go ahead and add in some gloves. Let's make sense of how he's holding his axe. Right now it looks like it's just hanging out in thin air. So, this is the stage where things start to make sense and where all the stuff that you learned in the first video is going to be applied. And it's get into the habit of asking yourself questions, really, and I mean it, ask yourself out loud. Like, does this shape work? Does this glove shape work? It's almost like you're having a conversation with yourself, and people might think you're crazy, but it's okay. I say go for it, because when you ask yourself these questions and you don't have the answer, then that's how you know maybe it's not the best choice for your character. I want to make more sense of what his clothing looks like and start adding in elements like a collar or a coat. And, let's see if it works. This is also a great way to really break up my silhouette as well. Sometimes things can be very overwhelming if the shape is too big. So when you break them up into littler shapes, it makes it more interesting. Now I think I want to make the size of my axe a little bigger, as well as give him slightly bigger feet. I think they are a little too small. And let's go back in there and adjust our silhouette again, because it looks quite different from the character that I have drawn now. I want to make sure that it still makes sense. So I'm just going to erase out all that extra gray. And I'm thinking right now, I'm just trying this out. I want to add in that web motif that I had on my Snow White. This is me just nitpicking at details. If this is something you want to do, you can do at this stage. You don't have to explore this. You don't even have to explore these minute design details until the color stage. And now let's move on to our final character design, the Queen. Now, you can start out this design whichever way you want, but remember to keep all those angles and diagonal shapes in mind. As I'm drawing my character out, I'm really thinking about what she's wearing. I envision her having this very long dress that kind of, goes all the way down her legs and looks very grand at the bottom. And I also want to emphasize a very pointed crown and maybe even give her some very big spikes on her shoulder pads. I think as a silhouette, this is going to look really cool. I'm creating like a nice big oval shape for her head, but most of this is going to be the crown. I want to really emphasize that royalness that she has, as well as the sinisterness of her. Of course, at this moment, she doesn't look very evil, but once we start adding in those angles and I really start pushing the shapes and making them look very dynamic. Now on a new layer, just as I did with the dwarf and the huntsman, let's start adding in some definition and some perspective to our character. So I'm just going to draw in my queen and keep her as rough as possible. I'm really just keeping in mind what her outfit could possibly look like. Again, remembering all those gothic details like a web. And I want to add all of that in so that when I look at my characters together, they all seem cohesive. And of course, don't forget to really add in that crown as well. And I have an image in my mind and I'm just loosely drawing it out. There's nothing set in stone at this stage. Now I'm going to lower the opacity of this layer, and on another layer, I'm going to start adding in the anatomy and things that will start to help my character come to life. So we're just kind of outlining everything over here. You know, as I'm looking at the silhouette, she looks evil, but I think I could push it more. But you know, let's just work on the shapes that are inside the silhouette for now. We're going to kind of dissect what everything looks like, and I'm going to play with these shapes and see if they work. They may work, they may not work. Like I said, working with our evil characters that have a lot more angular shapes, it can tend to look chaotic very fast. So, you know, be aware of that, and you can always edit later on. You know, I've given her a kind of curvy crown right now. I'm not sure if that's working. I'm also going to do something that is going to break the silhouette of my character. I don't know if this is a good idea right now, but I'm adding in some hair. And we're going to give her some long hair right now. I don't know if this necessarily will work. We will find out later on as I keep drawing. Now that we have finished the design for our queen, let's put her together with all our characters and just kind of pay attention to the different shapes that are in our lineup. Now, in our next video, we are going to start adding in some variation to our form. We're going to introduce a little bit of value as well. In this video, we were able to work out all the details of our design anatomy, so it's now time for the next and final stage. Of course, remember that throughout this process, we are going to keep things very rough and loose. It's not about creating the perfect drawing, rather it's about creating characters that evoke the right design language and communicate the emotions that you want them to convey.